When you watch a lot of movies on a regular basis like I do, a lot of them can kind of run together because they feel hollow, factory-made, and just overall samey. But every once in a while you can come across a few films that just beam with the passion from the filmmaker. Where you can kind of clearly identify what inspired them, what they're pulling from, and just how much passion they had for their craft while they were making it. And it's almost kind of rare nowadays to actually see that released in theaters, well, here in Utah, because we're in Utah and they only release films like that for the first run in New York and LA, even though there's a whole frickin' country in between those two places. But I digress. Those were the thoughts that I pretty much had running through my head as I left the theater after watching this film. And bear in mind, this is the first Wes Anderson film that I've seen in its entirety. I've not seen Rushmore, I've only seen like a few seconds of the Royal Tenenbaums, but that's pretty much it. I didn't see Moonrise Kingdom, so this is the very first Wes Anderson film that I literally saw from beginning to end. That said, let's begin this episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, the first thing I immediately noticed when the film started is that it alternated between two different aspect ratios. In the scenes that are taking place in modern day and the 60s that are kind of the framing device, the shots are in the 1.37 to 5 anamorphic widescreen. But when we're looking at the majority of the story that's supposed to be taking place in the 1930s, we're in the 4:3 aspect ratio. And that was pretty interesting, kind of an interesting choice on Wes Anderson's part, but given the overall style he kind of approached, I can kind of see what he was going for. He was kind of trying to evoke the past, and a lot of people think, oh yeah, period pieces, but still using modern stuff. He was kind of evoking how in the past you didn't have widescreen. You had a square to work with. And that's not the only thing he uses to kind of evoke this old Hollywood style, as a lot of the compositions and just overall pacing and blocking of a lot of these scenes are lifted straight out of films from the silent era. I mean, the comedic chase scenes even use stop motion to simulate manual undercranking. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, in the old days of cinema, they would have to actually manually crank the camera to get the film rolling. And when you overcranked, that would get more frames per second, thus producing slow motion. But when you undercranked, that would mean fewer frames, meaning that when it was played at the full 24 frames per second, everything would be sped up. And that was actually kind of creative, because that was how the chase scenes looked in a lot of films of the silent era, because they wanted to speed things up. So they would undercrank it or use stop motion. And so that was actually pretty creative. In addition to kind of taking stuff from a silent film, another overarching theme that I kind of picked up from the cinematography was the idea of kind of making every image look like a painting, and not even just the, oh, look at this large hotel with its colors and everything, but there are literally quite a few shots throughout the film where, well, much like how you're seeing me, the subject is in the center of the frame, it's a POV shot, but they're framed the way a subject would be framed in a portrait painting, which is kind of one of the underlying things throughout the film, because one of the focuses is the painting Boy with Apple, and it was a subtle thing that I kind of noticed after I left the theater that, oh, Wes Anderson was composing these people like this because that's how you would do it in a painting. And it was actually also kind of cool just how he had that little layer of subtlety in there. While the film is well executed visually, the story may leave a little bit to be desired in the eyes of the more casual moviegoer. I mean, it's not an outright comedy. The best way I can describe it is that it's rather a quirky and artistic series of small tragedies delivered in a deliberately dry fashion. Like, it's dry humor. That's probably the best way I can describe it, is that the whole film is more of a dry, dark comedy. And, well, that's pretty much all I can really say about that. I mean, much of the draw is going to be the visuals, just kind of the overall visual mise-en-scène of the entire film. And this film is definitely what you would probably consider to be more highbrow than most films that are usually released in theaters. This one's definitely more for the hardcore cinephiles and the already established Wes Anderson fans out there. However, if you're looking for a film that's kind of out of your comfort zone, but not gonna make you too uncomfortable, then I highly recommend this film. This is a good film to kind of get your feet wet in the often frightening waters of artistic cinema. That said, I give the Grand Budapest Hotel a 4.5 out of 5. And before anyone comments, yes, I know it's actually pronounced Budapest, but everyone kept saying Budapest throughout the film, and in context, it would just seem kind of weird if I just kept saying the Grand Budapest Hotel. But I'm just making that clear. Yes, I'm aware that that's how you actually pronounce the city. It's called Budapest, not Budapest. But I digress. Let's just cut to the end slate thingy already. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen, but that brings this episode of Romney's Reviews to a close. Tune in next time for my review of Sabotage. See you then.